Hey there, you're listening to Genoa's Arcs, a self-reflective podcast exploring transformation with purpose, honoring growth and connection through awareness and presence. This is your host, Genoa Kay. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This episode contains reflections on trauma and emotional recovery. It is not intended as a substitute for professional advice. Please trust yourself and seek support as needed from a licensed mental health or healthcare provider. The views expressed are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect those of any guests, sponsors, or platform providers. As the creator and host of this podcast, I believe that service and sustainability go hand in hand. The idea that serving others must mean depleting yourself or working for free is a myth I choose to not perpetuate. While much of this content is freely available, you may hear sponsor messages or occasional requests for financial support, all of which help to keep this space alive and well. Some content may be offered through a paywall as a way to honor the time, energy, and skill it took to create them. If access to paid content is a barrier for you, please visit the show notes for more information. This is the second episode of a storytelling series within this podcast called The 6 Arcs, a Spiral Journey into Emotional Recovery. Each arc contains 10 episodes and traces a story of emotional recovery, reflecting the non-linear, often turbulent nature of finding the way back to yourself. Arc 1, Reclaiming Innocence, is where it all begins. The first moment you realize something is stirring. It's about awakening and making contact with the parts of us that trauma buried, distorted, and silenced. It's the beginning of a return to play, curiosity, creativity, and to the deeper truth of who we are beneath the coping and despair. This is the phase where our inner world doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It tiptoes in, often disguised as a question. Remember me? On episode 1, we explored the idea that innocence isn't something that can be taken away permanently. It can be buried, hidden, or distorted, but when we choose to reclaim it, we begin the journey home to ourselves. In this 3-part second episode, we'll zoom out and take a look at innocence through a wider lens, the historical context. Because here's something, in my opinion, that gets glossed over. Innocence hasn't always been seen as something worth protecting, especially not when it came to children. Just a quick note about this episode. I am not an expert, whether historically or present day, on the topic of child rights or advocacy. Part 1. How innocence wasn't always protected or valued. For much of human history, childhood wasn't always recognized as a distinct phase of life. Kids were seen as small adults, they worked long hours in fields and factories, they were forced into marriages or sold for slavery and recruited as child soldiers or used as political tools. And abuse, whether emotional, physical, or sexual, wasn't just common, it was normalized. Silence wasn't just survival, it was expected. Even the word innocence didn't mean what we now associate it with. It wasn't this sacred, protected space of wonder and vulnerability. It was often viewed as ignorance, a lack, a liability to be fixed. And that mindset shaped how entire systems treated the most vulnerable. This isn't ancient history either. Legal protections for children are still shockingly recent in many countries. And we know that even now, every single day, systems fail to protect the innocents, in courtrooms, in institutions, and too often in families. Part 2. The Evolution of Childhood and Child Rights. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that the idea of childhood began to shift, thanks in part to philosophers, psychologists, activists, and advocates who proposed, often seen as radical for doing so, that children deserve protection, education, and emotional care. Writers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau began to argue that childhood should be a time of innocence and moral development. The Industrial Revolution brought attention to child labor, and slowly the idea emerged that children were not just future workers, but humans in their own right. Still, that evolution has been messy and incomplete. Many of us, especially those who grew up in dysfunctional homes, authoritarian religions, or under other childhood traumas, never got to experience the kind of protected childhood that is now idealized in our culture. Some of us were robbed of innocence before we could even name it, and when that happens, there's a silent message left behind. You don't get to belong to the category of the protected. You're already ruined, too far gone. But that's a lie. Part 3. Why reclaiming innocence is a radical act of emotional recovery. Reclaiming innocence in adulthood could be considered as an act of defiance against that lie. It says, you don't get to define who I am just because my innocence wasn't protected. It should have been. I was a child. What happened to me was not my fault. Reclaiming innocence means saying, I am allowed to feel joy again. I am allowed to connect with my inner child and not internalize the idea that it makes me immature. I am allowed to dream, to feel my emotions, to be open if I so choose. I am not permanently damaged goods. I can heal. I can go on to live a fulfilling life. I can have a family of my own if I so choose, and not worry that I will harm my children like I was harmed. And it's radical because most of society still doesn't know how to hold space for that. We're told to be tough, to move on, to get over it, to stop acting so childish, to stop being playful and learn to perform instead. But when you reclaim your innocence, you don't go back to who you were before the pain. You grow into someone new, someone who integrates the darkness but doesn't live in it, someone who can look at the world with eyes wide open and still choose to see the light. In a world obsessed with proving, defending, and performing, choosing play, curiosity, openness, softness is revolutionary. Choosing to see yourself as worthy of care, tenderness, and truth, that's often considered radical, when it should just be the norm. If no one ever told you that your innocence mattered, I want you to hear it from me now. It did, it does, and if it was harmed, that was never your fault. You are not what happened to you. You are not the broken system you grew up in. And if you are ready, or even just curious, about what it could look or feel like to reclaim your inner world, to believe that you are always worthy, even before you learned to perform, hustle, or fight, then you are exactly where you need to be. I'm so glad you're here. If you've found value in today's episode and you'd like to support the ongoing creation of this space, you'll find ways to do so in the show notes. Support here is always optional, but also deeply appreciated. On the next episode, we'll talk about the inner child, not as a pop psych trend, but as a living part of us that carries memory, hope, and potentially untapped wisdom. Genoa's Arcs is written, recorded, and produced by Genoa Kay. Original music composed and produced by Genoa Kay.